Today we're going to be talking about this guy. This is the Viltrox 85mm f1.8 with an RF mount. If you own a Canon EOS R, the R5, the R6, the Canon C70, the Red Komodo, they all have an RF mount. And if you want RF mount lenses, you know that they cost a lot of money. Generally speaking, it's like buying a Cinema Prime, right? They start at above, generally speaking, above $2,000 for the lens. So today, we're going to be talking about this lens. This lens is made by Viltrox, and it's an 85mm RF f1.8 lens. The reason why this lens might come into your radar if you own an RF mount type of camera is because of the price. This is significantly less than any RF lens made by Canon. What's supposed to be special about this lens, it's its ability to communicate with the Canon EOS R5 and use its amazing tracking. So if you're using it for stills or for motion and the lens can keep up, well then it's kind of a no-brainer to give this a hard look and save yourself some cash. So I took it out into what I would consider to be the real world. I set up a couple of different shots and I wanted to see just how this lens actually performed. Because if it can be used for video, because I'm not primarily a stills photographer, I mainly do video. If it can be used for video, then this might not be a bad option if you're trying to save yourself a little bit of cash. So let's take a look at the shots.
You wait out the window, the street lights glow through the thickest rain. You keep all your sorrow, with all the blinds pulled, every day's the same. Speak to me now, speak to me. Speak to me, speak to me now. Speak to me now, speak to me. We're just vagabonds, we're just wanderers, surveying the night sky, hoping for daylight. We're just vagabonds, we're just wanderers, searching for an insight in the world we leave behind. Like a wall no one can cross. You can't keep all that sorrow, or you'll be the one who's lost.
So here's what I have to say about the shots that we just took a look at. This lens, communicating with the Canon EOS R5, it's a little tricky in that the RF mount on this lens makes the Canon R5 think that it is actually an adapted lens, that it is an EF lens being adapted onto the camera. And I think that is the main problem with this particular lens and the camera, and why it is that we got to see so much hunting. When it did lock in, it did identify the face. It did a good job of tracking it. It also did a good job of identifying the eye and then continuing to track the eye. The motors on this lens are not fast enough to compare to other native RF lenses. And I think that that's important to know, because if you really want to do an apples to apples comparison and say, hey, this is just as good as a Canon RF lens, the answer is no, it is not. Is this as good as a Canon EF lens? In some cases, I would say it's close, but not quite there. This lens suffers a bit from chromatic aberration, which when you stop down, it gets a little bit better. The coatings on this lens allow for flares not to be controlled well enough to be used in a high dynamic range or backlit type of scenario, because the image does in fact get washed out. So who would this lens be for? It's for someone who might have, say, the Canon RP, the Canon EOS R, that is not necessarily needing the predictable performance in autofocus that a professional would require when you're out in the field. In other words, if you have an RP or Canon EOS R or even an R5, and you're just, say, taking pictures of your kids running around in the house or your own personal projects where you can sit there and take time to get the shot again in case you miss, then this lens fits really well, and it will save you some cash. On the other hand, if you're okay with, say, using this lens as a manual lens, then you're going to end up with some pretty nice sharp images, assuming you nailed the focus. But the trick, again, and what this lens, I believed, was trying to represent, is its ability to communicate effectively with the Canon EOS R5 with the RF mount and leverage the mapping, the luminance, all the different lens corrections that are built into the Canon EOS R5 when you attach an EF lens and it is being adapted. I don't think it's quite there yet. The lens does have a USB port in the back here, which maybe they'll be able to update the firmware to make this perform a little bit better. This, of course, being the type of lens that it is focused by wire, which means if you were trying to use it in a video scenario where you want hard stops for your focus marks, this is not going to be the right lens. Another thing I'll say about this lens really is that if you attempt to use this lens, 85mm f1.8 RF mount by Viltrox, if you attempt to use it on, say, a camera like the Red Komodo, the camera will spasm out because this lens will not communicate effectively with the camera. So whatever the firmware of the lens is doing, it is tricking the camera, specifically the EOS R5, into believing that it is an 85mm EF lens being adapted onto the camera, and the adapter is built in because this already has an RF lens. Would I recommend it? Again, if you're using it just for your own personal projects, you're comfortable doing manual focus, or you have the ability to reshoot something that you might have missed, save yourself some cash, this is pretty good. For social media, the images that come out of this lens are going to be terrific. If you're a professional, you're making money on a shoot, and you can't afford to gamble, this lens is not for you. Hopefully you guys found the information useful, and until next time, I'm Carlos, and I will catch up with you guys in the comments. Take care.